The work of the International Resources Panel suggests that what we call resource intensity will continue to increase up to 2050 because there are many developing countries that still need minerals for their cities, for their roads, and this is resource intensity. However, excessive dependence on the export of these minerals will always create macroeconomic instability because commodity prices will go up and down. There are certain new minerals, what we call the boutique minerals, the battery minerals. These I'm talking about things like graphite, lithium, cobalt, which are important for the electrification of our lifestyles, about reducing carbon dependence. Those ones will certainly increase as more electric vehicles will be on the road. However, there are certain other minerals, like, for example, coal and possibly iron ore, which will have sort of a downward trend in terms of prices. But our views is that because of the resource intensity theory, which suggests that developing countries require minerals for their own urbanization needs, for consumption, and so on, minerals will still play a very important role for Africa's development. However, we should now talk about an inward utilization of these resources by promoting more value addition locally to meet our own needs of steel, our own needs of all sorts of minerals and products. That's one aspect of the conversation, making the most of our commodities by adding more value. The second is diversifying away from that dependence, utilizing some of the revenue streams towards creating opportunities in other sectors of the economy, linking the extractive sector with other sectors of the economy, having services, providing goods and services and inputs towards the extractive sector. Because the extractive sector, in terms of the cost profile, you're talking about 60% of the costs are procurement of goods and services. If you internalize that, through linkages development, then you are retaining a greater share of the mineral wealth in your own countries. So that's one aspect of the negotiation.
Perfect.
Yeah. So ECA is supporting those efforts by developing modules in terms of contract negotiations. Of course, we're behind the formulation of the African mining vision that articulates a coherent path towards making the most of our commodities by promoting what I've earlier indicated, greater resource-based industrialization, greater linkage with the rest of the economy. So there is hope, but there is also need to diversify. In Central Africa, because of that excessive dependence on extractives, we are articulating a program on economic diversification policies and reforms, which is centered on the need to ensure that economies utilize their resources rents well, but also promotes other growth potentials.
Perfect. So on that same breath, I'll just need maybe 1 minute from you to tell us about, we have the ministers set to come and over the next couple of days, and that bit on renegotiating the contracts has been a tasky one because it involves a lot of bureaucracy. So the time spent to try and change something that was embedded into these economic or macro policies is something of a bit of an issue.
Well, on contracts, of course, renegotiating contracts every time or changing laws every time does create instability because what investors want are predictability. So one aspect of our position about this is, as much as possible, avoid contract negotiations. Try and regulate it. Try and include most of the provisions in terms of the fiscal regimes and so on into your overall policy tools, though that are applicable to any sector. So that's one part of it. Regulate and reduce the extent of negotiation. But there are, of course, sometimes needs for negotiation. And those needs need to be addressed in a holistic manner. First, understanding what are the contradictions within the existing policies, laws, and regulations. For example, many countries want to pursue local content with their minerals in their mineral sector. But at the same time, they've signed bilateral investment treaties that do not allow you to have this, how do you call it, differentiated treatment to investments. If you and I are country A and country B, and they've signed a bilateral investment treaty, it means that you are going to give me the same treatment that you are doing to your domestic investors. Local content is the opposite. So you need to reconcile those aspects in terms of policy coherence. So those are the basics in terms of preparing our countries to get all the basics right. Where are the policy inconsistencies? What kind of institutional framework you have to create to elevate the responsibility, for example, for industrialization, to those that can coordinate better the institutions? Because most of the approaches currently are sectorial in nature. So that creates all sorts of failures in terms of policy failures that I've mentioned earlier. So some of the suggestions that we are bringing to Central Africa is that if you want to promote diversification, if you want to promote resource-based and trade-induced industrialization, then that has to be mainstreamed into your development plans and process. That needs to be given the necessary level of authority so that all the coordination failures are addressed.